Faerie Afterlight sets you in the land of Lumina, where you spend your time utilizing your enemy's abilities and venturing around lively environments where fish can fly, reminding me of this episode of Love, Death, Robot. The story's actually fairly interesting. You play as a mysterious lightseeker named Kimo, who meets a fairy named Wispy as they team up to put back together the broken fragments of Lucentia. Along the way, you can expect to fight some large, corrupted titans as you make your way to the source of the problem. However, you can also expect some twists. But, to better see if this could be a game for you, tune into my thoughts on Faerie Afterlight. I'm not sure why, but I love games with settings like this. It's a mix of mystery but also beauty. There's plenty of background details that'll keep your eyes busy. However, the foreground definitely is not as detailed, as the primary emphasis is with the gameplay and puzzle solving. That being said, you can expect to find native inhabitants in most areas who you can strike up conversations with, which really just brings more life to the experience. Every zone has its own theme, but instead of doing the typical water-fire route, they're all completely unique from one another, whether you're exploring a seemingly above the ground ocean or a fungal forest. And to match the aesthetic of these areas are some amazing tunes. Truly, each one is a joy to listen to that carries a soothing sound. Now, unlike most Metroidvanias, each area plays out more like a level, as the map is separated by zones. However, they are very detailed, which in my opinion should be a lot more common within this genre. So basically, once you enter an area for the first time, you'll pretty much cover most of it before moving on to the next. Backtracking really is not much of an issue in this title, but for those who do love exploration, Faerie Afterlight is most definitely not focused on that, as there isn't much to collect outside of some hidden lore which reward you with gems. You can then use these gems when visiting merchants to purchase extra health, stamina, or teleport bells. Personally, I was not the biggest fan of purchasing an item just to teleport, but you should be able to find plenty of gems, so this really becomes a non-issue. However, you cannot fast travel to zones outside of the one you're in at the time using the teleport bell. You instead need to speak to one of these guys. Okay, that's enough on fast travel. You'll find new enemies in every area, and although they don't pose the greatest challenge, you will find yourself in locked rooms which could be fairly difficult at times. There's not an abundance of enemy variety, but they are very important to the gameplay of Faerie Afterlight. If you've played an Ori game, then you know the focus is not on the exploration nor the combat, but instead on the gameplay. This is also the emphasis in Faerie Afterlight. For those who I'm sure might be thinking it, this is not a clone of Hollow Knight or Ori, and it truly has a unique feel with its gameplay mechanics. It begins fairly simple, as you can only jump and attack, but when you find Wispy, you can then begin manipulating the environment around you using the right analog stick. This could involve moving platforms for platforming or clicking a button to change the direction of a specific block. But because you might have to do both of these things at the same time, it can definitely be difficult. Additionally, you'll also be unlocking new abilities for Kimo that make traversal much easier and opens the door for more challenging gameplay sequences. Besides just new abilities for traversal, you'll also be unlocking varied ranged attacks, which I really didn't use too much due to the slower combat, but you also must learn enemy abilities. As I mentioned previously, you can control most enemies, so they play a huge part in the gimmick for a certain area. For example, in Roseate Thicket, you have to sling yourself around using these enemies, but you have to be very precise. The only downfall to being able to control the enemies is that they're more for platforming purposes, not necessarily combat, which is as simple as attacking and evading when need be. I truly was not disappointed by this though, because I found the gameplay to be exceptionally smooth and the platforming to be a lot of fun. It's not often you run into games where they actually utilize the analog stick for anything besides movement, so for this, I found Faerie Afterlight to be unique here. And although the core of the combat is simple, that doesn't stop the bosses from being presented well. I guess I'm a huge fan of cleansing corrupted environments because it's a common trope, and when I found out that's what I would be doing, I was all in. Also, spoiler here, but that's what I have timestamps for. You get a bit of backstory for each Titan, as they're typically supposed to be the leaders of a given region. However, they've of course been corrupted, but if you talk to the locals, you'll learn about them and that they've been acting different. Although it's a small thing, I do enjoy this with bosses over having them just randomly appear. I believe it ups the scale of the fight. Speaking of scale, these bosses are large and come with some enjoyable enjoyable soundtracks. Each one has plenty of attacks for you to memorize and usually at least 2 or 3 phases. You'll also be utilizing whichever ability you unlocked in a given zone when facing them, which gave each fight a unique feel. However, I didn't find them to be overly difficult because their attacks are slow, but I did usually die a few times before defeating them, so overall it's a nice balance. I found the designs to be great. They're all very different from one another, and although some might be a literal bug, others have a very unique look and a great setting. I won't get into too much detail here, but the bosses are definitely a plus in this title. Faerie Afterlight is not the most daunting or difficult title, but it's a very enjoyable experience. However, where it excels greatly in one area, it does lack in exploration and combat. But if you're looking for a game with a beautifully crafted aesthetic, some great platforming mechanics, and some fun large-scale boss fights, then Faerie Afterlight might be something you're looking for. You'll be able to find it on Steam and the Switch beginning on September 28th for $20. I don't usually talk about price points, but if I'm doing reviews, it's probably a good thing for you to know. The game is not a short experience by any means, so unless you want to just fly through things, this is one you can take your time with. As I already mentioned, the core focus with this title is the gameplay and platforming, so if you're a fan of Metroidvanias like Ori, then I bet this is right up your alley. So, until next time.